Why education is the worst investment of the 21st century, and what to replace it with. Everyone thinks getting rich is hard. They're wrong. Getting rich is actually straightforward. The math is simple. The steps are documented. Thousands of people have done it and written books about exactly how. You can follow a recipe. You know what's genuinely hard? Staying poor. Navigating a system that charges you extra for having less. Surviving a financial architecture that was specifically designed, not by conspiracy, but by compounding logic, to keep you exactly where you are. That takes real effort. That takes a kind of exhausting, invisible heroism that nobody writes books about. And here's the second inversion that nobody wants to say out loud. Getting an education isn't hard either. Sitting in a classroom for 4 years, absorbing information, passing tests, that's not hard. Humans have been doing it for centuries. What's genuinely hard is paying for that education, surviving the debt that follows, and then discovering that the credential you spent 4 years and $80,000 acquiring is worth less on the open market than it was the day you enrolled. That's the trap. And almost nobody sees it until they're already inside it. We've been sold a story. The story goes like this. Education is the great equalizer. Get a degree, get a job, build a life. It's the American dream in its most distilled, most marketable form. Parents repeat it. Teachers repeat it. Guidance counselors repeat it. The entire institutional apparatus of modern society repeats it with the confidence of people who have never once questioned whether the map they're handing you actually matches the territory. But maps go out of date. And this one expired somewhere around 2005. What we're living through right now is not a temporary disruption. It's not a blip. It's a structural collapse of one of the most powerful value creation myths in human history. The idea that a 4-year degree is a reliable, scalable, repeatable path to economic security. That myth is dying. And the people who refuse to see it dying are the ones who will be most damaged by its death. This is not an anti-education argument. Let's be precise about that from the start. This is an argument against a specific financial instrument, the traditional 4-year college degree, that has been systematically mispriced, over-leveraged, and sold to millions of people who were never given the information they needed to make a rational decision. This is an argument about math, about physics, about the brutal, indifferent logic of systems that don't care about your feelings or your parents' hopes. So let's start with the physics. There's a concept in orbital mechanics called escape velocity. It's the minimum speed an object needs to break free from a gravitational field without any additional propulsion. For Earth, that number is roughly 11.2 kilometers per second. Below that speed, no matter how hard you push, gravity wins. You go up, you slow down, you come back. The planet pulls you home. Now think about economic class as a gravitational field. The lower you start, the stronger the pull. Not metaphorically, literally. The financial physics of poverty create a gravitational force that operates on your time, your cognition, your decision-making, your social network, and your access to capital. Every dollar you earn gets taxed at a higher effective rate when you're poor, not just by the government, but by the entire ecosystem of financial products designed for people without options. Payday loans, overdraft fees, rent-to-own furniture, high-interest credit cards, the premium you pay for buying in small quantities instead of bulk, the cost of unreliable transportation, the price of living in a food desert where a bag of chips costs less than a head of broccoli. This is the gravitational field. And here's the brutal truth about it. Linear effort doesn't escape gravitational fields. You cannot gradually increase your speed and eventually drift free. Below escape velocity, every trajectory curves back down. Working a little harder, saving a little more, being a little more disciplined. These are admirable qualities, but they are not escape velocity. They are the equivalent of jumping higher. You still come back down. The traditional education system was supposed to be the rocket. The credential was supposed to provide the thrust. And for a specific window of time, roughly 1950 to 1990, It actually worked. A college degree was a genuine escape mechanism. It was scarce, it was valued, and the economic return on the investment was real and measurable. A degree in almost anything opened doors that were otherwise closed. The credential itself was the signal. But then something happened. Something that economists call credential inflation, and that physicists would recognize as a phase transition. A point where the rules of the system change fundamentally, not gradually. Between 1980 and 2020, the cost of a 4-year college education in the United States increased by approximately 1,200%. Not 12%, not 120%, 1,200%. During that same period, general inflation was roughly 236%. The cost of college grew at more than 5 times the rate of everything else in the economy. Meanwhile, the median wage for college graduates, adjusted for inflation, barely moved. The asset appreciated in cost while depreciating in value. That is the definition of a bubble, and like all bubbles, it was sustained by a story. The story was so powerful, so emotionally resonant, so deeply embedded in cultural identity that people kept buying even as the fundamentals deteriorated. Parents who had seen the degree work for them in 1975 assumed it would work for their children in 2015. They weren't lying. They weren't stupid. They were extrapolating from a data set that had stopped being relevant. Here's the number that should end the conversation but somehow never does. The average student loan debt for a 4-year degree in the United States is now approximately $37,000. For graduate degrees, it's often double or triple that. And the median starting salary for a college graduate is around $55,000. Before taxes, before rent, before the basic cost of existing as an adult in a modern city. The math on that equation does not work. It has not worked for a long time. And yet the machine keeps running, keeps enrolling, keeps issuing debt because the machine was not designed to serve the students. It was designed to perpetuate itself. This is what economists call a principal-agent problem. The university's incentive is to maximize enrollment and tuition revenue. The student's incentive is to maximize lifetime earnings. These two incentives are not aligned. They haven't been aligned for decades. But the university controls the narrative, controls the credential, and controls the relationship with the employers who still, out of habit, out of HR policy, out of institutional inertia, require the credential for entry-level positions that could be learned in 6 months. The credential has become a tax, a $37,000 tax on the right to apply for a job. And here's where the physics gets really dark. There's a principle in economics that was articulated by Terry Pratchett, yes, the fantasy novelist, with more clarity than most academic economists have managed. It's called the Boots theory of socioeconomic unfairness, and it goes like this. A man who can afford to spend $50 on boots will buy a pair that lasts 10 years. A man who can only afford $10 boots will buy a pair that last 1 year. Over 10 years, the poor man spends $100 on boots. The rich man spends $50. The poor man's boots are always wet. This is not a metaphor. This is the operating logic of the entire lower tier of the economy. Being poor is expensive. Not because poor people make bad decisions, though the system is designed to make bad decisions feel like the only available options, but because the entire financial infrastructure of poverty is built on extracting maximum value from people with minimum leverage. When you have no savings buffer, every unexpected expense becomes a crisis. A $400 car repair that a middle-class family absorbs from their emergency fund becomes a payday loan at 400% APR, for someone living paycheck to paycheck. That $400 repair ends up costing $600, $700, $800 by the time the interest compounds. The poor pay more for the same problem. Now apply this logic to education. A wealthy family sends their child to a $60,000 per year private university. They pay cash, or they take out a small loan at favorable rates, or they leverage financial aid that the university offers to attract high-achieving students. The child graduates with minimal debt, uses the network and brand name of the institution to land a high-paying job, and the investment pays off within 3 to 5 years. A working-class family sends their child to a state school at $25,000 per year. They take out federal loans at 6 to 7% interest. The child graduates with $40,000 in debt, enters a job market where the state school credential carries less weight than the private school credential, earns less, and spends the next decade paying off debt that compounds faster than their salary grows. The investment may never pay off. Same product, radically different outcomes. Because the financial architecture of education, like the financial architecture of everything else, is designed to reward those who already have capital and punish those who don't. This is the entry penalty. This is the tax on starting at the bottom. And the education system doesn't just fail to solve this problem. It actively amplifies it. It takes the gravitational field of economic disadvantage and adds another layer of debt on top of it, ensuring that the people who most need escape velocity are the ones carrying the most weight. The credential that was supposed to be the rocket has become an anchor. And the cruelest part? The people selling the anchor are still calling it a rocket. They have the data. They know the return on investment has collapsed. They know that 40% of college graduates are working in jobs that don't require a degree. They know that student loan debt has crossed $1.7 trillion in the United States alone. They know all of this, and they keep selling, because the machine must be fed. Now let's talk about what this does to your brain. Because this is where the story gets biological, and biology is where most self-help narratives completely fall apart. Chronic financial stress, the kind that comes from carrying debt you can't see a way out of, from working a job that doesn't use your skills, from watching your peers advance while you tread water, doesn't just feel bad. It physically restructures your brain. This is not motivational language. This is neuroscience. When you're under chronic stress, your body produces cortisol. Cortisol is a survival hormone. In short bursts, it's useful. It sharpens focus, increases heart rate, prepares you for immediate action. But chronic cortisol exposure does something devastating. It literally shrinks the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for long-term planning, impulse control, and complex decision-making. It enlarges the amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for fear responses and threat detection. In practical terms, chronic financial stress makes you worse at the exact cognitive task you need to escape chronic financial stress. It's a biological trap. The stress of being in debt impairs your ability to make the decisions that would get you out of debt. The anxiety of underemployment reduces your capacity for the creative, strategic thinking that would lead to better employment. A landmark study by researchers at Harvard and Princeton found that poverty, defined as the cognitive load of managing financial scarcity, reduces effective IQ by approximately 13 points. 13 points. That's the equivalent of losing a night of sleep every single night. That's the cognitive penalty of being broke. And it's not a character flaw. It's not laziness. It's physics. It's the brain operating in survival mode, allocating cognitive resources to immediate threats at the expense of long-term strategy. Now add the dopamine layer. The modern economy has become extraordinarily sophisticated at exploiting the dopamine system, the brain's reward and motivation architecture. Social media, streaming services, fast fashion, food delivery, gaming. All of these industries have invested billions of dollars in understanding exactly how to trigger dopamine release in ways that create compulsive behavior without genuine satisfaction. The hit comes fast. The satisfaction fades immediately. The craving returns stronger. For someone under chronic financial stress, with a cortisol-flooded brain and a depleted prefrontal cortex, these dopamine traps are not just tempting. They're almost irresistible. Because the brain in survival mode is desperately seeking relief. It's seeking any signal that says, you're safe, you're okay, you're not in danger. And a new purchase, a new episode, a new social media notification provides exactly that signal. Briefly, cheaply, and with no lasting effect. This is what economists call present bias on steroids. The inability to delay gratification isn't a moral failing. It's a neurological consequence of chronic stress. And the entire consumer economy is built on exploiting it. Here's the contrast that matters. The person who has financial security, who has assets, who has a buffer, who is not operating in survival mode, experiences the same dopamine triggers, but has a functioning prefrontal cortex to evaluate them. They can ask, is this purchase aligned with my long-term goals? They can say no. Not because they're more virtuous, but because their brain is operating in a different mode. The cognitive hardware is the same. The operating conditions are different. This is why financial advice that says, just stop buying lattes, is not just useless, it's insulting. It misdiagnoses the problem. The problem isn't the latte. The problem is a brain under chronic stress, in a system designed to exploit that stress, making decisions with impaired cognitive hardware. The latte is a symptom. The system is the disease. And the education debt machine feeds directly into this system. It takes young people at the peak of their cognitive plasticity, the years between 18 and 22, when the brain is most capable of learning new skills, forming new habits, and building new neural pathways. And it locks them into a 4-year program of information consumption that is largely disconnected from the actual skill demands of the modern economy. Then it hands them a bill that will follow them for a decade or more, keeping their cortisol elevated, their prefrontal cortex suppressed, and their decision-making compromised at exactly the moment when they most need to be making good decisions. The machine doesn't just take your money. It takes your cognitive capacity. It takes the years when you could have been building real skills, real networks, real assets. It takes the neurological window when learning is cheapest and most effective. And it gives you back a piece of paper and a debt. So what do you do instead? This is where most critiques of the education system fall apart. They're long on diagnosis and short on prescription. They tell you the map is wrong, but don't give you a new one. So let's build one. The first move is the hardest, and it requires a kind of psychological violence against your own assumptions. You have to be willing to enter what I call monk mode, a temporary radical restructuring of your life around a single objective. Not forever, not permanently. But for a defined period in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, you have to be willing to strip away everything that isn't essential to the mission. Monk mode is not about deprivation for its own sake. It's about reclaiming cognitive bandwidth. Every social obligation, every entertainment subscription, every low-value relationship, every dopamine trap you're currently feeding, these are not neutral. They are consuming the finite cognitive resources you need to learn, to build, to think clearly. The brain has a limited capacity for deep work. Every hour you spend on shallow consumption is an hour you're not spending on skill acquisition. And in the current economy, skill acquisition is the only reliable path to escape velocity. The math here is brutal and simple. If you spend 4 years and $80,000 on a traditional degree, you emerge with a credential that may or may not be valued by employers, a debt that will cost you $400 to $600 per month for the next decade, and skills that were largely theoretical. If you spend 12 months in monk mode, living cheaply, consuming deliberately, learning obsessively, you can acquire a set of applied skills that the market will pay for immediately, not eventually, now. The question is, what skills? This is where the concept of the moat becomes critical. In medieval warfare, a moat was the defensive structure that made a castle nearly impossible to attack. In economic terms, a moat is the combination of skills, knowledge, and positioning that makes you nearly impossible to replace. And the key insight, the one that most career advice completely misses, is that moats are not built from depth in a single area. They're built from the intersection of 2 or 3 areas where you have genuine competence. Think about it this way. If you're a good writer, you're competing with millions of good writers. If you're a good programmer, you're competing with millions of good programmers. But if you're a good writer who understands programming, who can explain technical concepts to non-technical audiences, who can write documentation, who can create content for developer tools, you're competing with a much smaller pool. The intersection is where the value lives. Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, articulated this principle clearly. You don't need to be the best in the world at any single thing. You need to be in the top 25% in 2 or 3 things that don't usually go together. The combination creates a unique position that is genuinely difficult to replicate. That's your moat. The modern economy is full of these intersections waiting to be occupied. Data analysis plus communication. Design plus psychology. Sales plus technical knowledge. Healthcare plus technology. Finance plus behavioral economics. The credential economy rewards depth in a single vertical. The skill economy rewards the ability to bridge verticals that don't usually talk to each other. And here's the critical point. You can build these intersectional skill sets in 12 to 18 months of focused, deliberate practice. Not 4 years, not $80,000. 12 to 18 months with the right resources, the right structure, and the right level of intensity. The resources exist. They are cheaper and more accessible than they have ever been in human history. The barrier is not access. The barrier is the willingness to take the path seriously when the entire culture is telling you that the only legitimate path runs through a university admissions office. Now, let's talk about the social dimension, because this is where most people fail, even when they understand the intellectual argument. You can know everything I've just told you. You can agree with every word, and you can still fail to act on it, because the social forces working against you are more powerful than most people acknowledge. There's a phenomenon in behavioral economics called the crab bucket effect. If you put one crab in a bucket, it will climb out. If you put multiple crabs in a bucket, none of them will escape, because every time one crab tries to climb, the others pull it back down. Not out of malice, not out of conscious sabotage, simply because the climbing crab is disturbing the equilibrium, and the other crabs respond instinctively. Human social groups operate on the same principle. When you decide to change your trajectory, to stop spending money on things your peer group values, to spend your evenings learning instead of socializing, to pursue a path that looks strange and uncertain from the outside, the people around you will resist, not because they want you to fail, because your change implicitly challenges their choices. Your decision to pursue a different path is, whether you intend it or not, a statement about the path they're on. This is not a reason to be cruel or dismissive toward the people in your life, but it is a reason to be honest about the social cost of change. The people who successfully escape the gravitational field of their starting conditions almost universally report the same experience. The hardest part wasn't the learning, wasn't the work, wasn't the uncertainty. The hardest part was the social friction, the comments from family members, the friends who drifted away, the loneliness of being in transition, of having left one world without yet arriving in another. The solution is not to become a hermit. The solution is to be strategic about where you get your social and intellectual nourishment during the transition period. And this is where the concept of virtual mentorship becomes essential. You cannot always choose your physical environment. You cannot always choose your family, your neighborhood, your coworkers. But you can choose what voices you allow into your head. You can choose whose thinking you expose yourself to. And in the current information environment, the thinking of the most successful, most insightful, most strategically sophisticated people in the world is available to you for the cost of a library card or a $15 monthly subscription. Charlie Munger spent his life building what he called a latticework of mental models, a framework of ideas drawn from multiple disciplines that allowed him to think about problems in ways that most people couldn't. He didn't build this latticework in a classroom. He built it by reading obsessively, across disciplines, for decades. He read physics and psychology and history and biology and economics and biography. And he synthesized what he read into a coherent framework for understanding how the world actually works. This is the alternative to the credential, not the absence of learning, the presence of a different kind of learning. Self-directed, cross-disciplinary, applied, and relentlessly focused on building the mental models that allow you to see patterns that others miss. The people who are winning in the current economy are not, by and large, the people with the most credentials. They are the people with the most useful mental models. They are the people who can look at a new situation and quickly identify the underlying dynamics, the key leverage points, the most likely failure modes. That capacity is not taught in most universities. It is built through deliberate, self-directed intellectual work over years, and it is available to anyone willing to do the work. Let's get specific about the money, because this is ultimately an argument about capital allocation, and capital allocation requires numbers. The average American family currently saves approximately $57,000 for college. That's the number. That's what parents are setting aside, sacrificing for, planning around. And the question I want you to sit with is, what is the highest return use of that $57,000? Option A, traditional 4-year degree. Cost, $57,000 to $200,000 plus. Time, 4 years. Output, a credential, some knowledge, a network of peers who are also starting from zero, and a debt that will constrain your financial decisions for the next decade. Expected return, highly variable, increasingly uncertain, and declining year over year as credential inflation continues. Option B, a deliberate, structured investment in applied skills and assets. Let's build this out. Year 1, $15,000 for an intensive coding bootcamp, a professional design program, or a data analytics certification. These programs exist. They are rigorous. They are taught by practitioners, not academics. They are focused on the skills that employers are actually paying for right now, not the skills that were relevant when the curriculum was designed 15 years ago. Graduates of top boot camps report median starting salaries of $65,000 to $85,000. The time to employment is typically 3 to 6 months after completion. Simultaneously, $5,000 invested in a low-cost index fund, not a stock pick, not a crypto bet, a boring diversified index fund that tracks the broad market. At a historical average return of 7% annually, $5,000 invested at age 18 becomes approximately $75,000 by age 60. That's the power of compound interest working for you instead of against you. Year 2, $10,000 to build a real project, a real portfolio, a real business. Not a school project, not a simulation. Something that exists in the world, that has real users or real customers, that demonstrates real capability. This is the credential that the market actually values. Not the piece of paper, but the proof of work. The GitHub repository with 500 commits. The freelance portfolio with 10 completed projects. The small business that generated $30,000 in revenue in its first year. Year 3, $10,000 to expand the moat. Add the second skill set. If year 1 was technical, year 3 is communication, sales, or design. If year 1 was creative, year 3 is analytical. Build the intersection. Create the position that is genuinely difficult to replicate. Remaining $17,000, emergency fund and continued investment. The emergency fund is not optional. It is the buffer that keeps you out of survival mode. It is the financial equivalent of the prefrontal cortex, the resource that allows you to make long-term decisions instead of reacting to immediate threats. Without it, every unexpected expense is a crisis. With it, unexpected expenses are inconveniences. Total cost, $57,000. Same as the college savings. But the output is radically different. Instead of a credential and a debt, you have applied skills, a real portfolio, a growing investment account, an emergency fund, and 3 years of real-world experience. You are not starting your career in debt. You are starting your career with assets. This is the difference between working with compound interest and working against it. The person who graduates with $40,000 in debt is paying interest. The person who invested $5,000 at 18 is earning interest. The math diverges from day one, and it never converges. The gap between them grows every year, automatically, without any additional effort, because that's what compound interest does. It rewards those who start on the right side of the equation and punishes those who start on the wrong side. Warren Buffett has said that the most important investment decision he ever made was choosing his parents, meaning being born into a family that had capital to invest. He said it as a joke, but the underlying point is serious. The single most powerful variable in wealth accumulation is not intelligence, not work ethic, not education. It's which side of the compound interest equation you start on. The education debt machine puts you on the wrong side, deliberately, systematically. At the moment in your life when you are most capable of learning, most capable of building, most capable of taking the risks that create asymmetric returns, it takes that window and fills it with debt. Let's talk about what the market actually wants right now, because the credential economy and the skill economy are not just different in degree, they're different in kind. The credential economy is based on a simple signal. This person completed a program that we recognize. It's a proxy for capability, not a measure of it. Employers used it because it was cheap to evaluate and because, for a long time, it was a reasonably good proxy. A degree from a good school meant the person had survived a competitive admissions process, had demonstrated the ability to complete long-term projects, and had been exposed to a certain body of knowledge. But the proxy has broken down. The admissions process has been gamed. Grade inflation has made GPA meaningless. The body of knowledge taught in most programs is increasingly disconnected from the skills employers actually need. And the cost of the proxy has become so high that it's no longer worth paying for the signal. What the market actually wants, what employers, clients, and customers are actually paying for, is demonstrated capability, not the promise of capability, not the credential that suggests capability, the actual, observable, verifiable ability to do a specific thing well. This is why GitHub profiles matter more than computer science degrees for software jobs. This is why a portfolio of published writing matters more than a journalism degree for content roles. This is why a track record of successful sales matters more than a business degree for sales positions. The market has developed its own credentialing system, and it's based on proof of work rather than proof of attendance. The skills that are commanding premium prices in the current market are not the skills that universities are primarily teaching. They are the ability to build and deploy software, even at a basic level, the ability to analyze data and communicate insights clearly, the ability to create compelling content across multiple formats, the ability to understand and apply principles of behavioral psychology to marketing, product design, or sales. The ability to manage complex projects with multiple stakeholders and competing priorities. The ability to think probabilistically, to reason under uncertainty, to update beliefs based on evidence, to avoid the cognitive biases that lead to systematic errors. None of these skills require a 4-year degree. All of them can be developed through deliberate practice, good resources, and real-world application. And all of them are currently in higher demand than the skills that most 4-year programs are producing. The gap between what universities are teaching and what the market is paying for is not a temporary misalignment. It's a structural feature of an institution that moves on a timescale of decades, while the economy moves on a timescale of years. Universities are not designed to be responsive. They are designed to be stable. That stability was a feature when the economy was also stable. It's a bug when the economy is changing faster than any institution can track. There's one more dimension to this that almost nobody talks about, and it's the most important one: the psychological cost of the wrong path. When you spend 4 years pursuing a credential that doesn't deliver the promised return, something happens to your relationship with learning itself. You associate education with debt, with disappointment, with the gap between what you were promised and what you received. You associate intellectual effort with institutional obligation rather than personal growth. You learn to perform learning, to produce the outputs that the system rewards, rather than to actually learn. This is perhaps the most insidious damage the credential machine does. It doesn't just take your money and your time. It corrupts your relationship with the most powerful tool you have, your own curiosity. The people who are building the most interesting careers in the current economy are, almost universally, people who have maintained a genuine intrinsic relationship with learning. They read because they want to understand things. They build projects because they're curious about what's possible. They pursue skills because the skills themselves are interesting, not because a credential requires it. Their learning is self-directed, self-motivated, and self-sustaining. This is not a personality trait that some people have and others don't. It's a relationship with learning that can be cultivated or destroyed. And the credential machine, with its standardized curricula and its high-stakes assessments and its 4-year timelines, is extraordinarily effective at destroying it. The alternative, self-directed learning, project-based skill development, deliberate practice in areas of genuine interest, is not just more economically efficient, it's more psychologically sustainable. It builds the intrinsic motivation that sustains long-term growth rather than the extrinsic motivation that collapses the moment the external reward disappears. Think about the difference between someone who learned to code because they wanted to build something and someone who learned to code because it was required for their computer science degree. The first person codes on weekends. The first person builds side projects. The first person is still learning 5 years after graduation because the learning itself is the reward. The second person may be technically competent, but their relationship with the skill is transactional. They learned it for the credential. Without the credential as motivation, the learning stops. In a world where the half-life of specific technical skills is shrinking, where the tools and languages and frameworks that are relevant today may be obsolete in 5 years, the ability to keep learning is more valuable than any specific thing you currently know. And that ability is built through a relationship with learning that the credential machine systematically undermines. Here's what I want you to do with this information. Not tomorrow, not after you finish this article. Right now, in the next 10 minutes. Write down the number. The actual number. The total cost of the education path you're currently on or planning to go on. Tuition, fees, room and board, books, lost income during the years you're in school, interest on the loans. The real number, not the sticker price. For most people, this number is somewhere between $80,000 and $250,000. Now write down what you would do with that money if you weren't spending it on a credential. Not what you think you should do with it. What you would actually do with it if you were being honest about your interests, your strengths, and the skills that the market is currently paying for. Now ask yourself, which path has a higher expected return? Not which path feels safer. Not which path your parents would approve of. Which path, when you run the actual numbers, produces the better outcome? For most people, the honest answer to that question is not the traditional degree. It's the path that involves deliberate skill acquisition, real-world application, and the kind of compound growth that comes from starting on the right side of the financial equation. But here's the thing about escape velocity. Knowing the physics doesn't automatically get you off the ground. You still have to build the rocket. You still have to light the engine. You still have to endure the discomfort of acceleration, the social friction, the uncertainty, the periods when you're not sure if the path you've chosen is going to work. The cage is open. It has been open for years. The information is available. The resources are accessible. The paths are documented by thousands of people who have walked them. The barrier is not information. The barrier is the willingness to act against the gravitational pull of social expectation, institutional inertia, and the comfortable story that someone else's map is good enough for your journey. It isn't. Your map has to be built from your actual skills, your actual interests, your actual financial situation, and your actual assessment of where the market is going. Not where it was when your parents were making their decisions. The world they navigated no longer exists. The credential that worked for them is not the credential that will work for you. The path that felt safe in 1985 is the path that leads to debt and disappointment in 2025. The gravitational field is real. The social pressure is real. The fear of being the person who didn't go to college, who took the unconventional path, who bet on themselves instead of on an institution. That fear is real, and it is powerful, and it will not go away just because you understand the physics. But the physics are also real. The math is also real. The compound interest is also real. And it works for you or against you, regardless of how you feel about it. The question is not whether you can afford to take the unconventional path. The question is whether you can afford not to. The rocket is sitting on the launch pad. The fuel is available. The trajectory has been calculated. The only thing missing is the decision to light the engine. Make the decision. The gravitational field doesn't care about your hesitation, but it will absolutely use it against you. The cage is open. The exit requires courage. The math is on your side. The only thing standing between you and escape velocity is the story you've been told about what the path is supposed to look like, and your willingness to write a different one.